Welcome to the Woodbury Word. I'm Wood.
And I'm Dre.
And we want to welcome you back to another episode. As always, please check us out on all platforms available. Woodbury Collection on YouTube, Woodbury Collection on Facebook, at Woodbury Collection on Instagram, and the Woodbury Word or Woodbury Word on Spotify. It's been a while since we've had a chance to chat. Been a lot going on in the world. Seems like that's the mantra of 2020. It's a lot going on in the world, but we're still here. We are still mining away at our passion. We are still trying to bring the current events to the forefront. We are still trying to educate and to entertain and to bring a sartorial slant to all things America right now, if you will. Dre, what's been going on with you?
Same thing with you, man. It's just been heavy. Had some personal stuff kind of going on, finished school and got that done, and kind of was just like, all right, let's do something. And was really of the thought that, all right, we can go full tilt with this, with the show and everything. And then it just feels like it just keeps getting more weighty. And I know that nothing, I guess new has happened in terms of, a killing that we've seen on the news, but it just feels like in some of the conversations that I'm having with individuals, whether it's on social media or what have you, when the George Floyd thing first happened, I felt very hopeful. Don't want to say I'm not hopeful, but some of the conversations that I've been having have been less than ideal. And it seems like people just either aren't getting it, whether it's based on their life experience or just they don't want to get it. So in this episode, we're going to talk about some things that are hopefully going to give some light and some insight into how we can hopefully move forward. But that's what I've been, man. Just kind of trying to stay positive, man, and stay hopeful.
Yeah. There's always the concern that motivation and momentum is lost in times like these. That there's an initial shock and there's an initial response, and then we lose momentum, we lose focus. What I've been intrigued by is when I listen to most of the elders speak, those who are paying attention, those who have been through so many scenarios similar to this, because as we reiterate often, this is nothing new to a certain segment of the population. These things are not new. What makes me hopeful is in talking to elders, they all have said this feels different. There's a shift here that I hadn't seen. And for some, it's just there's the comfort in knowing that the next generation is awake at the wheel. I think for a lot of the older generation, that there was a sense that there was a lack of empathy for anything social justice related. That we had become part and parcel of this perceived American dream, which was I got to get mine at any and all costs. And
forget who else is impacted negatively or whatever.
Who's impacted? Who has helped me get to this level? Right. What systems? What work it took to change certain systems just to get us to a certain point? And right. We know now for sure that none of these systems are perfect, but there was a lot of work put in by a lot of people who made a lot of sacrifices, right, for us to even be able to get on a platform like this and say what we want to say.
Very true. We take that for granted, man. We take it for granted. I think our generation, maybe not so much now, but we didn't have an opportunity to kind of give our thoughts freely. Just a generation or two ago, you couldn't. Forget that the technology wasn't around. You couldn't go out in public and say certain things, much less this.
That's right. so that's one thing that I've been sort of paying attention to, keeping on my dashboard. The other is to capitalize on the moment, to capitalize on those who are beginning to do the work of self-analysis. And where do I come in this thing? I've never been abused. I've never been discriminated against. So how do I help? Where do I jump in? This term that's been going around called allyship, and what that looks like. What does an ally look like? And for sure, as of 2020, allyship looks totally different, because this is a moment where systems are looking to be disrupted. We're looking to rebuild systems in a reimagined way, in a way that represents what America looks like in the 21st century. These are systems that have been operating under old pretenses, under rules and both stated and unstated, that have been in place for centuries now. And so as we look to rebuild some of these institutions, how do we do that as a collective? And I think one of the things that my wife and I and friends and I talk about is what allyship looks like and what kind of work it takes to be an ally. One of the things that always sort of perplexes me, gets under my skin, is, the question, what can I do to help? What can I do to help? It's hard to ask the oppressed, what can I do as a part of the oppressive class to help you? Like, you should, like, those things, like, that's an added burden that you're putting on a subset,
Right. Very true.
That's an added pressure. So there are things that you can do. And from my vantage point, I think the number one thing, and this goes across institutions as far as I'm concerned in my life, the first thing you do is educate yourself. The first thing you do is begin to educate yourself. There's an author, and I hope I get her name right. I think it's Rachel Cargle, that has put together a 30-day course. My wife and some folks that I know are actually taking part. And what it is a collection of books and documentaries and information that lays out plainly what the trajectory of this America that we live in looks like from its inception and prior to its inception. Actually, if we want to talk about things like the 1619 Project that details the first slaves landing in North America, that's a few years before. There's time in between when the first slaves land and when the first founders, the first explorers find themselves on North American soil. But it's a course. It's a collection of documentaries and books and writings and things that will give you a clear, concise timeline of what this looks like and how it manifests itself today. I think that's a great starting point, even if it's not that course, but something in that realm. You have to educate yourself, because we do it all the time. We have to do it all the time. In order for us to enter certain institutions that are not native to us or our communities, we have to educate ourselves on those things. Okay, what will it take for me to get to college if I'm from a family that no one ever entered an institution of higher learning? What do these things look like? So I think that's a great place to start when we begin to talk about allyship.
Yeah, agreed. And the education part is huge. And it's not just getting the education, it's wanting the education. Being an ally, I think, is going to really force people to take the time and really dig in and come in without preconceived notions, or at least willing to tear down some of those preconceived notions. One of the things that I'm finding, just human beings in general, myself included, a lot of times we have the need to be right. And therefore, even when we go after education, a lot of times we go after research, we go after data that falls with the conclusion that we currently have. See, I told you X, Y, and Z. And in order to really be an ally, you have to be able to and be willing to say, I'm willing to be wrong. And then also let me say this. I've seen a lot of friends, people, kids I grew up with, or they're adults now, who are like, well, I don't want to say the wrong thing. Please know we're not as concerned about you saying the wrong thing as we are about inaction. We would rather you do something, stub your toe, trip, fall, what have you, all in the name of progress and movement and bringing some type of conclusion to this issue that we have. I'd rather you do that, say something like, maybe it was a little insensitive, what have you. I'd rather you do that than do nothing and be paralyzed. So I just want to throw that out there to the allies that are out there that are part of our friend groups and families and things of that nature. Don't be so concerned with saying the wrong thing. Be more concerned with doing nothing. We'd rather you do something than nothing.
Yeah. To that point, let's not forget that allyship is very similar to friendship. It's a lifelong process, essentially. It's a process of aligning oneself with a group that's been marginalized, a person, a group, an entity that's been marginalized for whatever reason. But aligning yourself with consistency, with trust, accountability. So these are all things that sort of mirror true friendships, with the exception being, the alignment is between a group that's been marginalized and a group that has not, that has benefited from the marginalization. So to your point, it's no one's asking for perfection. No one's ever asking for perfection in friendships. Matter of fact, the best of friendships are ripe with imperfect moments and actions, and it's the overcoming of those actions and the conversations that happen to get beyond those actions that really solidify those friendships. The same with allyship. No one's expecting. I'm not expecting a person who really has no concept of what it's like to be a Black man,
right,
in what can feel like a police state in your own area.
Right.
I can't expect you to understand that. I can't expect you to know how that feels. What I would hope is that you would begin to try to see what that looks like for someone.
Yes.
What does it look like to feel this way in your own home? We're in a space where you pay taxes, where you contribute, where you have just as much right to be and to act and to engage and to benefit as your neighbor, as your brother, so that's what, when we speak about allyship, I just wanted to make that plain too, that it's no one's asking for perfect conversations. No one's asking for perfect movements and decisions, but we have to begin to try to understand where one another, where we are, what our perceptions are, what our perspectives are, more so than our perceptions. And
let me also add this. This is a huge elephant, and the saying goes, you take one bite at a time, right? Or one cut at a time, whatever the saying is. And so for allies, don't feel like you have to solve the whole problem. Find a solution. You might have a friend who, is Black and they're a single parent. Okay, then that might be the avenue where you first start because it touches you, it impacts you. Again, just do something. Get some education. You don't have to swallow the whole elephant. You don't have to eat it all at once. Just find something that is a burden in your heart that kind of touches you and start there. It took a long time to get here. We're not going to fix this thing overnight, but we can't fix it with everybody being paralyzed from how big the Goliath is, right? You got to pick up one stone at a time. and shoot it. So
That's right.
Just adding that in there as well.
That's right. So just to pivot off that, and for my basketball folks to keep that pivot toe down so that you don't travel, but to make that transition, regarding the Supreme Court ruling in favor of the Native American tribe in Oklahoma this week, you've heard us on this podcast, this particular episode, and in general, again, we're talking about allyship and what it looks like to sort of have a united front to confront some of the systemic irregularities that we exist in. One of the things in our community that we struggle with is the balance between using the framework that is in place that the crafters of the Constitution, if you will, sort of established to continue to make perfect this union that we're a part of, that we live under. But to balance that with, the fierce urgency of now, if you will, like, okay, we've tried to use your legislative options available to us to no avail. Like it's not working. So when we see another group of marginalized individuals who have used that process with success, and let's not get it twisted. That was not an overnight process. And you're talking about indigenous people who have been in this space longer than most of us that are here now. But yet the political process still allowed for them to regain their jurisdiction. And jurisdiction, you've heard us use this term often, their jurisdiction, their personal sovereignty in a land, in a space that belongs to them, that was taken from them wrongly. But in terms of allyship, those are the things that we have to begin to look at instead of wondering about if we are losing the moment to other marginalized groups, if other marginalized groups are making moves that aren't making moves and not recognizing, again, the sacrifices that African Americans have made for this movement. Because I think for most African Americans, that's the most frustrating part, that most minorities who have been able to make advancements and progress have done so on the back of the progress, on the back of the foundation that was laid by African Americans, as has this country in general. If you want to talk about who has helped build the country, you're talking about mainly African Americans, but mostly marginalized, wholly marginalized groups. We're going to talk about the Chinese that came over and built the railroads, the Native Americans who provided the land, and the African Americans, or the indigenous Africans who became African Americans, and the indigenous people of darker skin tone who were here with the Native Americans. Let's not leave them out as well. So you talk about those folks who built this thing. I think your modern African American gets frustrated with the process of rage and outrage, the need for change, and then progress made by other marginalized groups. And it may not look like the same for us. So what that looks like in terms of allyship.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I wonder if, and I'll kind of get on a soapbox of sorts later, but it almost makes me wonder, are we losing the battle focusing on, hey, how come they got something ahead of us, instead of us saying, hey, they got something, what were their tactics? What tools did they use? What force did they use, politically? And how did they get it? And what can we learn from it? Are we so concerned with getting the credit and being first that we aren't allies to others in the ways we want people to be allies to us?
Yes.
Are we looking at it from a bigger picture, saying, okay, you got this. All right, what did you do here? Okay, you did A, B, and C. Cool. We're going to do A, B, and C to get this. All right, there's something else. What did this group do? All right, we're going to get 1, 2, 3 because you did 1, 2, 3. And so are we so concerned about being first that people find it hard to even be allies because we perhaps aren't as good of allies as we should? I mean, it's not necessarily a critique, it's a question.
Right.
Are we viewing people who get progress as enemies, or should we be looking at them as counterparts and allies and learning things and gaining education from their moves, their tactics, their strategies, and just simply following suit?
That's right. That's right. No, I'd have to agree wholeheartedly with that. And again, just a question, but definitely want to highlight the win. That's a win for a Native American tribe. You know, a people that have not been able to say, you know, with consistency that they've been treated justly or received what is rightfully theirs, what they're rightfully due.
Right. And so as we talk about allies, we've kind of outlined what an ally is. I want to pivot a little bit to now what racism is and what it is not. And this is a deeper conversation, and we'll have many more. We can't cover it all here on this episode. But this week I did some kind of basic studying. I mean, you know, basic research. And racism is identified, and I'm paraphrasing, as a belief that one race is superior to the other based on some innate characteristic, right? And that because of that innate superiority, the group that believes that they are superior deserve superior outcomes. Now, the word that's not used, that's missing, is hatred. And so I found that to be extremely interesting because when we talk about racism or systemic racism, most people go to slurs and dogs being sicked on people and water hoses and church bombings and those things that are generally motivated by hate. Well, those things are easy to identify. Oh, this person hates Black people, or they hate Asian people, or they hate Native American people, etc. But systemic racism, I think, is that subtle part where hatred doesn't necessarily have to be in play. It's just simply a belief that I'm superior than you, and therefore my life should have superior results. And so I can frame a constitution and a Bill of Rights that is to my favor because I feel like I'm superior. I don't have to hate you. I just have to believe that your life doesn't have to be as good as mine. And I can create laws and create structures and systems that benefit me. And if they happen to benefit you, you cut through the system, you're supremely talented in an area. Okay, cool. You can be rich too, but you don't even own that area. So you can be a great basketball player, but you don't own the team. You can be a great rapper, but you don't run the record label or the movie studio or something to that degree. So I really hope people, when they're having these conversations about racism, when you're having it with allies that kind of open their eyes, or you're having it with people who refuse to say a term, Black Lives Matter, because they want to call it a Marxist organization and all that kind of stuff, which is kind of missing the point. I just want you to say my life has value and matters. When you're having those conversations and people don't want to admit that racism is real and it's rampant, if you are able to give them a clear definition of what it is and what it's not, I think you're better able to then describe your experiences, and they can see, oh, wow, that is racist. That is a racism. When you look at the impacts of some of these laws, and how is it that whether it's the educational systems, the judicial system, the healthcare system, the economic system, how is it that Black people are at the bottom I'm talking about the collective. I'm not talking about your one neighbor or your one boss who happens to be Black. I'm talking about the collective. When you look at the collective and you see that our outcomes are just so bad, it's either a belief that we are innately inferior, or there was a system put in place to ensure that these outcomes happen, not based on hate necessarily, but based on I've got to look out for me and my group to the detriment of others. Now, I'll say one last thing. Hatred is not needed for racism to be established, but I do believe that racism is required for racism to thrive. Racism is needed amongst the people to make sure that these things continue. Because the one thing that I'm starting to believe is that racism is not the final boss. For any kids that grew up, playing video games, racism is not the big boss. And that's going to be controversial. Some people are going to be mad at me, but that's okay. I think the big boss at the end of the game is classism. But I think racism, sexism, all the other isms are offsprings of classism. And if racism is doing its job, it never allows us to confront classism. So if poor Black people and poor white people can't stand each other, it prevents them from coming together. If middle-class white people and middle-class Black people can't come together, they can't stand each other, it keeps us from joining together and seeing, oh, we actually have a common enemy, which are the systems that are taking place in this, that have been set up in this country. And then that kind of takes me to a whole nother topic. We'll actually do another episode on it, but it's about politics. And I would encourage anyone, shameless plug, they don't even know who we are, but Valuetainment has an interview, their YouTube show, that talks about the industry of politics and how it's set up to not benefit either Republican or Democrat. It's set up to maintain the status quo. And it does that by having two distinct groups, at least on paper, who can blame the other for why they didn't get things done.
Yep.
The people on those two sides then say, well, we'd be further along if you just voted conservative or liberal. All the while, it's a right wing, left wing, but they're part of the same bird.
Yep.
And so therefore, we have to be willing to confront the system, the industry of politics,
yep,
in order to really get things done.
Yep.
I said a mouthful, but just want to kind of throw that out there, because as you're talking to allies and you're informing them and they're saying, well, what should I know? Well, here's some basic things to know. So as you're talking to your family members who have some racist views, as you're talking to coworkers and neighbors who have some racist views, you can actually confront them with the foundation of how everything has been established to really open some eyes.
Yeah. And I think it's just as important though for them to see. You've got to be able to discuss the entire arc of racism and so how it's established, what it by definition and in theory is, and then how it's manifests. So you're right, and the definition does not include hatred. It's I have to make myself superior than another, and so in order to do that, I have to distinguish myself from the other, and then I have to label certain characteristics that I possess that the other does not. That's the only way that I can. The only way that I can. I have to define the difference in order to rationalize my superiority, right? So, but the second step to that, which has to be a part of the conversation, is, so how do you manifest? So once you've established that, and if you want to establish that tone or that principle, how do you execute that? So it's just like saying, the neighborhood rule is everyone has the right to protect their home, their homeland, their quarter of an acre, eighth of an acre, whatever your homestead sits on. You have the right and the obligation to protect that any way that you wish. So some are going to use fences because the principle has already been established. You can protect your space for your benefit, right? Because this is yours. This belongs to you. And whether you work for it or it was handed to you, it's yours, so you get to protect it. So some are going to use fences. Some are going to use invisible fences. Some are going to use alarm systems. Some are going to keep the AK by the side. Some are going to have a prayer of protection hanging on the wall when they walk in as their security. Like, that is the extent of their security. So it manifests itself in different ways based on personal preference and what that individual deems is going to be most effective for them. So when you think about racism being established, and then so what does it look like once it's established, and how do you maintain that? So then the hatred comes in, because it's okay, it's established now. It's pretty well known now that if I can divide, it's easier for me to subjugate that which I don't respect or love, right?
Correct.
So, and it's easier for me to convince you to subjugate that which that I can convince you that this is not worthy of your love or your respect.
Correct.
And then to take it a step further, it's easier to identify that which I've determined is a hindrance to my continued superiority by pointing out the differences. And what is the easiest difference to identify?
But you also determine the differences.
Right.
So the differences aren't identified in conjunction with the other group.
Right.
We're determining those differences and saying they're lazy, they don't want to work hard, etc. And so if I say those things and then I put a negative connotation to those things, now they're trigger words, they're buzzwords that cause you to say, oh, they're bad people because they're lazy.
Yep.
They want a hand out instead of a hand up. Like, it's all about, and it's almost biblical, right? God gave Adam the ability to name every animal and fish and all of the create, like he could name it. So elephants, if that's your belief pattern, we would assume Adam named it that, right? And so if you're a creator of a system, you get to determine the tags and the labels that everybody gets.
Right.
You get to establish the rules of engagement, who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. And because you're controlling the narrative, no one's really going to fight you on it. Think of it like a business. So for business owners, if you created the business, you might love your employees. You might go visit them when they're sick in the hospital, make sure their babies are taken care of and all that. But trust and believe, the people who benefit the most from the business being operational are the owners, the creators. No matter how much money the employees make, they're always going to make a little bit more.
That's right.
Or a lot bit more, right? Because it's their system that they created.
To benefit.
Much like how it is here. We did not come as an equal with power to bargain and sign treaties and say, all right, we're going to have access to this land and we're going to be 50-50 partners with you. We were brought here. So the systems were already in place or being put in place. So we didn't have the opportunity to say, here are the rules of engagement. The rules were already created.
That's right.
So those systems were put in place to benefit certain groups and hurt other groups. And the driving force of that, again, was not necessarily hate. It was money, which again takes me to a biblical principle, which I think is true. The love of money is the root of all evil. Right. And so that's the premise in which all this was created. Then throw on top of that some of the criticism that I've seen about Black Lives Matter. And yes, I don't agree with every single tenet of the organization, but I do agree with the premise that Black people's lives matter, and they haven't historically always mattered equally. I don't think that's anything worth arguing about.
Yeah, I have very little energy or much to say in regards to those who say all lives matter. Again, yeah, and I could read, memes and sayings until the cows come home. If we mattered, where have we? How long have they mattered? Because they sure didn't matter between 1619 and now.
Correct. And here's my
listen, if blue lives matter, you are a blue life for 8 to 12 hours of the day.
Correct.
And I'm Black 24/7.
24/7, man. So my question is, if racism started, we kind of know when it started when we got here, and it was probably already in place before we got here. When did it end? Right. And if you can't give me an answer, when did it end? Then our lives haven't mattered.
Right. And I've been in those conversations with non-minorities who have told me that, hey, racism doesn't exist. Hey, you've had a Black president. You have shown that you can be successful in this space and in this land. So no, racism doesn't exist. That's a personal issue. And just to put a pin on that last topic of racism, it's understand what the definition is and the origin of it is, and then understand what is used to keep the fires stoked.
Yeah.
We know. Yes, we know. Racism is a social construct. It was not. Yep. This is not created by the creator. This was constructed socially. That being said, that doesn't make it less real, and it doesn't make the tone of my skin a number one offender in the game of racism.
Right.
Because it's easily identifiable. It's when if you've got a business you're running, you want taglines that you want Google transformed, turning your business into a verb. That's what you want. You want your business to be easily identifiable and easily transferable into every aspect of life. And to racism, skin tone is what Google did to business. Skin tone is easily identifiable, it's easily transferable. I don't even have to get you into the weeds of why we have this system in place. All I have to teach you is that skin tone says that this person is that.
Right. No doubt about it. And so when you take it even to that, man, no, you're right. My question becomes to retort that person who says, well, you've been successful. We've had a Black president. Racism doesn't exist. I think one of the things that is missed is, and this is just from the small sample that I've been a part of in terms of conversations I've had. So I'm not painting a broad brush, but in a lot of instances, when I've talked to, individuals who are not allies, they frame it in the individualistic perspective. Well, you've done this, or the 8 Black kids I grew up with were that.
Yeah.
I get your individual perspective, but typically when Black folks talk about racism, we're talking about the collective,
That's right.
The collected experience, the greater community's experience. So we're not just saying I've been pulled over by cops and shot and all that stuff. We're talking about our cousins, our brothers, classmates, people, friends of a cousin. Like, that's what we're talking about. So it's a much bigger picture in our view than what I found that non-allies have spoken about. And so I think that makes it hard, because if you're us, business owners, corporate success, yada, 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 it's like, well, what do you guys complain about? Well, I can look past myself and see that there is a need that others in my group, they need a voice. They need champions. They need us who have whatever small bit of influence we may have or exposure. They need us talking about it. They need us changing the narrative in some instances. And so it's incumbent upon us to be able to do that and think about more than just myself. Yeah. I got to think about the larger group, the larger collective. And so, hopefully we can do that and have that understanding. So when we have these conversations, we can help people understand, I'm not just representing myself, I'm representing a larger group. And I'm saying this is our shared experience. Yep. Even if you point out to me, well, you didn't go through that. Yeah, I didn't go through every single thing, but I have my own experiences and I know of other experiences very intimately. That's right. And I think that's a great endpoint. I think that the only thing that I could say to that is, as a representative of a group of people who have been oppressed historically, that's a burden unique to us. Having the obligation, because it's more of an obligation than a burden. Yes. But it's the obligation to have to see things from the perspective of the collective. Mm-hmm. Regardless of what, and every decision we make, every move we make, every progression and regression, it's framed in the collective. That's a burden that those who are in positions or in the group of power don't have to deal with, don't have to acknowledge. Correct. Because if you think about it, the power groups, they're not speaking for those who look like them but don't have their same experience. Right. They don't speak for them a lot. Right. And that's a whole other issue that I think is a big issue. Listen, unless you're Trump and you're Pied Pipering them to believe that you're championing them. Right. So, a billionaire from New York cares about the poor farmer in Iowa. There you go. Give me a break. But there's so much more to cover in this topic, and we're going to do that. We promised you in the last episode, we're going to keep talking about these things. There are so many more topics and aspects that we need to cover. We want to do it in a way that's engaging. Please let us know. Reach out to us. Give us your thoughts. Or if there's any topics you want us to cover, questions you want us to answer, please reach out to us at our email, info@woodburycollection.com. Once again, don't forget to follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, all Woodbury Collection. And if you're looking for the audio podcast, it's available on Spotify, Woodbury Word, also available on Google, Apple, Anchor, anywhere you get podcasts, we're there as well. Well, Wood, we're going to head out, man. Anything else for the people before we go? I think I'm good, man. The only thing I want to say is we hadn't spoke much about the collection as of late, but just as we are in a space and time where it's time to rebuild institutions that better reflect us as the collective, I think the fashion industry as an institution is going through a remake, and it's just the creator's timing. You add a pandemic, give 3/4 teaspoonful of classic American racism, and you get a shutdown that interrupts all types of industries. And we're all going through it, thankfully. And I will say thankfully, with the help of my partner here, we are positioned in such a way that we are not in jeopardy of having to go away. Right. So we'll be here, and we're working on sort of the new look, what this looks like in totality, not just the new line for fall 2020, but what being a brand, a menswear brand, but a lifestyle brand more specifically, and where our aim is, what that looks like going forward. So we're doing the work, and we got some stuff we're bringing to you real soon. We're excited about it. So yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, man. Yeah, we're trying to make sure that we are respectful of life and what's going on, while also bringing you value and bringing quality along with function. Yeah. We want this stuff to make sense, right? So we are identifying what will actually benefit you in your life. If you're going to be spending the money, we want to make sure that it makes sense, that it works for you, and that you're getting the right pieces. And really, I think we're all kind of in this spot, Wood. We're all finding we don't need as much stuff as we thought we once did.
That's right.
So, but hopefully, you feel like you need Woodbury Collection. Hopefully, you feel like you need the Woodbury Word Podcast. We'll be back with you soon for our next episode. Until then, take care. Peace.
Peace to you.